everyone. So I wanted to do a small discussion to get a little bit of news out there and talk a little bit about Raiders, because we got the Direct. So first off, I want to put out here, and this is the reason it's a collaboration with the main channel, there isn't going to be a detailed breakdown of the Splatoon Raiders Direct. Unfortunately, just quite a lot of people are busy this week in terms of the people editing for me, and I don't want to force out a video that's lower quality or with less staff than we need to be able to make it happen on a reasonable time frame. So instead, I'm planning to do a bunch of mini Raiders talks here, and that will be kind of the plan going forward. These can be ranging from things like a little bit of analysis, but also talking about it, and this is also part of why I'm doing the collaboration with the main channel here, because I wanted to ask you guys, what kind of things do you want to hear me talk about for Raiders? You can go over a detail that you noticed in the Direct, or something that you found interesting, and this will be a little bit of a guideline for what kind of stuff we could be talking about. Because this is the first topic that came to mind for me to want to record for this, and then I'll go through and talk about things I find interesting for you guys. Hopefully that'll give more second channel discussion content that I've desperately been needing to make, and allow us all to get a little bit more hype about Raiders together. So, you know, a little bit different, but we're going to try it out. So, first thing I wanted to bring up is the idea of Raiders stuff transferring to Splatoon 4, because I think Raiders did a lot of interesting stuff, and due to the nature of this format, I am just going to be recording in the background of Splatoon 3 training room rather than actually showing most of the stuff, but, you know, that's how this format is. And there are a few things I find kind of interesting here. Mainly, I think that Splatoon Raiders has a good bit of mechanics that we could actually see in Splatoon 4. For example, there's a gadget that is a pure mobility tool. It is basically a dash, and I'm not talking about Splashdown, I'm talking about the other one, where it's just a damageless, large dash. I could easily see that being a sub-weapon option that doesn't take too much of your ink tank. Like, that would be a really cool and innovative use for a sub-weapon button. And speaking of that, the idea of having multiple subs was something I've wanted since before Splatoon 3, the idea of like utility options and bombs being different. But I think the idea of using two sub-weapon slots in general is a lot more feasible now, because Gadgets is basically that in motion. It is going to be a test run of that, even if it's a single-player one. And it shows that that button mapping scheme is pretty possible. Like, even if we wanted to keep Clam Blitz, which, I don't know how I feel about that, but like, let's say they wanted to keep Clam Blitz in the next game. Clams could just only be throwable with the A button, and you could allow, you know, R to be one sub and L to be another. That could be a really cool way to introduce two subs, and I think having that option to allow multiple subs could allow you to go way further into the creativity for what you could do. And it would also make some of the sub-weapons that are a bit more situational feel like they are a lot more useful in the game, because currently there is still, and there's always really has been, a bit of a divide between sub-weapons that are good in specific utilities versus those that are good in a lot of general ones, you know, bombs. The gap isn't as bad as it used to be, but I feel like in general, having access to two sub-weapons on a single main weapon just gives you a lot more freedom for what kind of sub-weapon designs you could reasonably fit into the game. I also want to say that in general, I think the movement of Splatoon Raiders looks pretty good. I like that there's a lot more options that influence your movement or give you different ways of traversing the map, and that's another thing that I think would be really cool to see in a future multiplayer Splatoon game, both in terms of single-player mechanics that we've been talking about before, or possible gadget abilities, or just in general, I think trying to add more stuff like that could be pretty cool. There is one thing in general, though, or two more things I want to talk about that I think would be especially interesting. One for single player and one for multiplayer. The first one on the single player side is the difficulty slider. We have a difficulty options menu for Raiders that seems to have a drastic outcome. On the easiest mode, there's a salmon attack does like 20 damage, and on the hardest mode, it does 180. And I'm assuming the, you know, casual difficulty will be somewhere in the middle. But I think this range is really cool and interesting. I'm not sure how it would fit depending on what kind of, you know, single-player expanded modes we see in Splatoon 4, but personally, I'd be really excited for that kind of mechanic there. I think it would spice up the single-player a bit if there was more difficulty slider options, and Side Order did have a bit of customization with that, depending on the kind of hacks you would bring into levels, but this is just a bit more of a direct slider for it. And while I've had my opinions change on difficulty sliders over the years in terms of this kind of thing, I know it's a divisive type of mechanic, I do currently kind of like it, and I think it just helps customize the experience alongside the whole multiplayer aspect. But there's one attribute that I thought of in particular when I thought of possible mechanics to go to Splatoon 4, and that is the different ink tank classes. There are ink tank classes in Splatoon Raiders, and how they function is really interesting. Now, in Raiders, they're basically just tanks that change what kind of gadgets you can use. But I think it's really interesting to have theming for different ink tanks, because they are specifically different ink tanks. And I'm assuming you could probably run with this idea a little bit different in a multiplayer sense. You could have it with the idea that, let's say, rather than if sub-weapons were attached to weapon kits, let's say we go full Raiders, right? So weapons have 2 attachable subs, but the subs you would pick would be dependent on your, like, class. So if you picked speed class, you would get options like the curling bomb or the fizzy bomb. If you picked the power tanks, you would get something like the suction bomb. If you picked a tactical tank, you would get something like a splash wall, for instance, right? You'd probably have to add multiple subs to balance out each category so that one isn't, like, you know, outclassed or anything. But I think it would be really interesting to mess with that, or maybe even have the ink tanks have specific stats to them. For example, maybe the speed tank has a 10% smaller ink tank, or the tactical tank, you know, could offset having a bunch of utility subs by having something like a 110% larger ink tank. So setting up things like a lot of beacons or mines. Like say you have a kit that's like sprinkler and mine or something, it'd be really easy to set multiple of them up. Like maybe it has an option where sub-weapons are cheaper on that specific class or that specific tank, I guess that's what it's called. I just think that's an interesting customization option, and the idea that there could be kind of a class system that influences what you could pick could be cool, especially since I think the kit system could be changed. Obviously, that would kind of also mess with, if you do like multiple different types of subs, it would be a way to restrict it, which could be both good and bad depending on the vibe they want to go for. But I think it'd be really cool to see mechanics like that in the next game. And then one other thing that I kind of forgot until now is the weapon customizations that they have are really interesting. We're seeing more base weapons that have different upgrade paths and skill trees. Like for Tri-Stringer, there was one where it gets 5 bullets, or 2 where they get 5 bullets, but in one of them, the 5 bullets are like Wellshring's one shot where they're close to each other, and in another one, they're really far spread out. I think the idea of having weapons that have slightly different variations to them could be an interesting way to expand multiplayer weapon options a little bit. Basically, think of the difference between something like Rapid and Rapid Blaster Pro. I think having more weapons like that could be really interesting, and that way, if they do keep a restrictive kit system option, that could allow there to be much more options for each weapon kit, depending on what you want to play. But that's all I have to say about this topic right now. Again, just a small little thing going over. You know, there's a few Raiders options that I think we could see for Splatoon 4, and I'm curious what other stuff might just be testing for what they might want to do in the next multiplayer game. How many of these mechanics are going to be a single-player locked thing, and how many of them are something that we might see in Splatoon 4? So let me know if there's anything I missed here when it comes to Raiders content. What kind of things from Raiders would you like to see in a mainline Splatoon game in the future? And again, let me know what types of stuff you'd like to see me talk about when it comes to Raiders next. Thanks for watching, everybody.